The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock, thick enough to stop a bullet and expensive enough to feed a family for a week. Gold embossing caught the afternoon light streaming through my apartment window as I read the formal script. Mr. and Mrs. Theodore Carter request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son Theodore James Carter III to Miss Lydia Harper. I set it down on my kitchen table, next to a stack of ungraded essays about the Great Gatsby. Fitting, considering I was about to attend a celebration where I'd once again be the invisible observer in someone else's golden world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 33 years old, and I still felt like that kid standing at the edge of family gatherings, watching everyone else belong to something I couldn't quite reach. My cousin Theo had always been the sun in our family's solar system, drawing everyone into his orbit with effortless charm and athletic grace. I was more like a distant moon, present but rarely noticed, reflecting light rather than generating it. Growing up in the same Connecticut neighborhood, we'd been inseparable as children. But somewhere along the way, the adults started keeping score, and Theo always won. His Little League trophies filled a case, while my debate team medals went into a drawer. His acceptance to Yale was front-page news in our local paper. My scholarship to Boston University rated a brief mention in the family Christmas letter. My apartment felt smaller as I held the invitation, walls lined with books I'd collected over years of teaching high school literature. Students' drawings and thank you notes created a collage of the life I'd built, modest but meaningful. Yet holding that wedding invitation, I felt the familiar ache of being measured against someone else's achievements and found wanting. The phone buzzed. Clara's name appeared on the screen, and I answered before the second ring. "Let me guess," she said without preamble. "The golden boy is getting married, and you're spiraling." "I'm not spiraling." I moved to the window, watching teenagers skateboard past on their way home from school. "I'm processing." "Elias," Clara's voice carried the patience of someone who'd been my closest friend for 5 years, ever since she joined the English department at Roosevelt High. "I know you love me, but you get that same tone when you talk about your family, like you're apologizing for existing." She wasn't wrong. Clara had been trying to convince me to submit my poetry to literary magazines for months, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my words weren't worth reading. Hard to believe in your own voice when you'd spent 30 years being told it wasn't loud enough to matter. "When's the wedding?" she asked. "Next month. Some fancy place in Rhode Island overlooking the ocean. Black tie, of course." "You're going." It wasn't a question. Clara knew me well enough to know I'd never forgive myself for missing it, no matter how much the prospect filled me with dread. "Yeah, I'm going." The drive to my parents' house in West Hartford took 40 minutes, but it felt like traveling backward through time. Each familiar landmark, the country club where I'd caddied summers, the prep school I'd attended on scholarship, the coffee shop where I'd written my first story, reminded me of the person I'd been trying so hard to become versus the person my family saw. My childhood home sat behind perfectly manicured hedges, a colonial revival that had been featured in Connecticut magazine when I was 16. The article had mentioned my mother's garden club presidency and my father's success in commercial real estate, but somehow forgot to include me entirely, despite my acceptance to Boston University. I found my parents in the sunroom, my mother arranging flowers while my father read the Wall Street Journal with the intensity of a man whose portfolio depended on every word. "Elias, honey," my mother said, barely looking up from her chrysanthemums. "How was the drive?" "Fine, Mom. Traffic wasn't too bad." My father folded his paper with military precision. At 64, Richard Carter still carried himself like the Marine he'd been 4 decades ago. Straight shoulders, steel gray hair, and eyes that seemed to calculate the net worth of everyone they encountered. "I suppose you heard about Theodore's engagement," he said, settling back into his leather chair. "Smart boy, marrying into the Harper family. That connection will serve him well in business." I got the invitation. I took a seat across from them, the same spot I'd occupied during countless family meetings where my future was discussed like a corporate restructuring. "Lydia's a lovely girl," my mother added, though I noticed she still hadn't made eye contact.
Very accomplished. She runs some sort of charity foundation. Foundation for Marine Conservation, my father corrected. The Harpers have been Newport royalty for generations. Theodore knows how to pick his battles. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Theodore chose wisely. I, presumably, did not. "How's the teaching going?" my mother asked, the question carrying the weight of polite resignation. She'd been asking the same question for 7 years, and my answer never seemed to satisfy. "Good. I was actually selected as Teacher of the Year for our district last month." I'd been saving this news, hoping for a moment when it might matter. My father glanced up from his paper, briefly. "That's nice, son. Of course, Theodore just closed that deal with the medical device company. Front page of the business section. Did you see it?" I hadn't, but that wasn't the point. The point was that no achievement of mine would ever be big enough to compete with whatever Theo had accomplished that week. It was an old game with predictable rules. Elias's wins were consolation prizes. Theo's were headline news. "Richard, honey," my mother said softly, "let's just be happy for both boys." But her defense felt half-hearted, like she was reading lines from a script she'd grown tired of performing. "I just hope you won't embarrass yourself at the wedding," my father said, returning to his paper. "It's going to be quite the affair. Important people will be there." The words hit exactly where they were intended. Don't embarrass yourself. Don't embarrass us. Don't remind anyone that you're part of this family by being so aggressively ordinary. I left 30 minutes later with my mother's cheek kiss still cool on my face and my father's dismissal ringing in my ears. The 40-minute drive home felt like escaping a crime scene where I'd been both victim and evidence. 2 weeks later, I loaded my rental car with a wedding gift I couldn't afford and a suit that made me look like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. The drive to Rhode Island's coast took me through Connecticut's rolling hills and into Massachusetts, past autumn maples that had traded their summer green for shades of fire. I'd made this drive before. Family reunions, holiday gatherings, Theo's college graduation, but never with such a sense of foreboding. My phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "Remember, you're not there to get their approval. You're there to celebrate Theo and then come home to people who actually see you." She was right, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were different animals entirely. I'd spent so many years craving my father's recognition that the hunger had become part of my identity. What would I be if I stopped wanting what I'd never receive? The coastal landscape changed as I drove east, trading suburbs for salt air and weathered shingle houses that had watched over the Atlantic for generations. The GPS led me down increasingly narrow roads until I reached the Ocean View Estate, a sprawling property that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought subtlety was a character flaw. Cars lined the circular drive. Mercedes, BMWs, a few Teslas that screamed, "We care about the environment, but not enough to drive something modest." I parked between a Porsche and a Range Rover, feeling like my rental sedan was apologizing for existing. The estate perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, its grounds manicured to golf course perfection. White tents dotted the lawn, and I could see caterers in crisp uniforms setting up what looked like a meal fit for foreign dignitaries. "Elias!" Theo's voice carried across the parking area, and I turned to see him approaching with that familiar grin that had been charming people since we were kids. At 31, he'd grown into the kind of man who made expensive suits look effortless and turned heads at airport bars. "You made it," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt genuine despite everything. I was worried the drive might be too much. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, and meant it. Whatever complicated feelings I had about our family dynamics, I'd always loved Theo. It wasn't his fault that our relatives had decided to use us as measuring sticks against each other. "Wait until you meet Lydia," he continued, his eyes lighting up in a way I'd never seen before. "She's incredible, smart, funny, keeps me honest. I still can't believe she said yes." This was the Theo I remembered from childhood. before the family scoreboard had been installed, when we'd built forts and shared secrets and believed the world was big enough for both of us to matter. "I can't wait to meet her," I said, and found I actually meant that too. "The ceremony starts at 4, but come find me afterward. We'll catch up properly." He clapped my shoulder and headed back toward the estate, probably to handle the 1,000 details that came with orchestrating what looked like a small kingdom's state dinner. I stood there for a moment, watching him walk away, and felt the familiar cocktail of pride and envy that had defined our relationship for decades. He deserved happiness. I wanted him to be happy. I just wished his happiness always felt like evidence of my own inadequacy. The ceremony unfolded with the precision of a military operation and the beauty of a Renaissance painting. Rows of white chairs faced an altar decorated with flowers that probably cost more than my monthly salary, all positioned to take advantage of the dramatic ocean backdrop. I found my assigned seat in the 3rd row, close enough to show I was family, far enough back to remind me of my place in the hierarchy. My parents sat in the front row with Theo's parents, my father looking proud in a way I'd only seen at moments like these when our family name was being elevated by association. The processional began with Mendelssohn's Wedding March, played by a string quartet, and I watched relatives and friends I hadn't seen in years process down the aisle in designer dresses and tailored suits. Everyone looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread titled "How the Other Half Lives." Then Lydia appeared, and even my cynical heart skipped a beat. She was beautiful in the way that seemed effortless. Dark hair swept into an elegant updo, a dress that probably cost more than my car, but it was her smile that caught my attention. Radiant and genuine, focused entirely on Theo waiting at the altar. The vows were personal and heartfelt, full of inside jokes and shared dreams that made the enormous crowd disappear for a few minutes. Theo's voice cracked when he promised to love her even when she corrects my grammar in public, and Lydia laughed through tears when she vowed to support your terrible taste in sports teams. For a moment, I forgot about family politics and status games. This was just 2 people who'd found each other, promising to build something together. It was beautiful. Then the cocktail hour began, and I remembered where I was. "Elias, there you are." My father appeared at my elbow, scotch already in hand despite the early hour. "Come meet Jim Peterson from Hartford Development. Jim, this is my son, the teacher." The introduction carried the subtle weight of apology, as if my father was explaining away a family embarrassment. Jim Peterson, a man whose handshake suggested he crushed coal into diamonds for fun, smiled politely. "Teaching, huh? That's, nice. What grade?" "High school literature," I replied, prepared for the conversation to die there. "Well, someone's got to do it," Peterson said with the enthusiasm usually reserved for discussing root canals. "Not much money in it, I imagine?" "It's not about the money," I said, though I could feel my father's disapproval radiating like heat from a furnace. "Of course not," Peterson agreed, clearly unconvinced. "Well, excuse me. I see someone I need to speak with." He drifted away toward a cluster of men whose presence seemed to bend gravity around their importance, leaving me standing with my father and a growing sense of inadequacy. "You could have mentioned the Teacher of the Year award," my father said quietly. Would it have mattered? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. The reception moved to the main tent, where round tables draped in ivory linen surrounded a dance floor that looked like it belonged in a ballroom. I found my assigned seat at table 7, not quite the relatives table, but close enough to observe the main action. As dinner progressed, I watched the easy camaraderie at the head table, the way conversations flowed like wine, the laughter that suggested these people genuinely enjoyed each other's company. My own table consisted mostly of distant relatives and family friends who made polite conversation about the weather and the beautiful venue. "Such a lovely ceremony," said the woman next to me, someone's aunt whose name I had forgotten immediately after introductions.
Theodore always was the special one, wasn't he? Even as a child, you could tell he was destined for great things. I nodded and smiled and felt myself becoming invisible again, the way I had at every family gathering for 3 decades, the way I would probably continue to become invisible until I died, at which point my obituary would mention that I was predeceased by his accomplished cousin Theodore. The toasts began after dinner as the sun painted the ocean gold and purple behind us. Theo's best man delivered a speech full of college anecdotes and gentle roasting. Lydia's maid of honor spoke about friendship and finding your person. Various relatives shared memories and well wishes, each toast adding to the evening's warm glow. Then my father stood up. He'd been drinking steadily since the cocktail hour, his cheeks flushed and his movements carrying the deliberate care of someone monitoring their own sobriety. The room quieted as he took the microphone, and I felt my stomach tighten with premonition. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the authority he'd cultivated through decades of board meetings and business dinners. "As Theodore's uncle, I've had the privilege of watching this young man grow from a remarkable child into an exceptional adult. So far, so good. Standard wedding toast territory."
Theodore has always been what we call a winner, my father continued, warming to his theme. Valedictorian, captain of the lacrosse team, full scholarship to Yale, and now this successful business venture. He's what every parent hopes their child will become: ambitious, driven, successful, the pride of our family. I could see where this was heading, like watching a car accident in slow motion. Now, not everyone can be a Theodore, my father said, his gaze finding me across the room. Some people choose different paths, easier paths perhaps, like my son Elias here, who decided teaching was enough of an accomplishment for him. The words hit like physical blows. Around me, conversations stopped. Faces turned toward our table with the mixture of fascination and horror people show at traffic accidents. But that's okay. The world needs teachers, doesn't it? Someone has to settle for ordinary so the extraordinary ones can shine brighter by comparison. He raised his glass toward Theo and Lydia. To Theodore and Lydia, may your marriage be as successful as everything else Theodore has ever touched, and may the rest of us learn to be satisfied with whatever scraps of accomplishment we can manage. The silence that followed felt like the moment before thunder. I could feel eyes on me, a mixture of pity and embarrassment, radiating from every table. My mother stared at her plate. Lydia looked horrified. Theo's face had gone pale. Something inside me cracked. 33 years of swallowed words, absorbed insults, and quiet humiliation rose in my throat like bile. I stood up, my legs surprisingly steady, and began walking toward the head table, where my father still held the microphone, looking pleased with his performance. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying further than I had intended. "I'd like to say something." My father's expression shifted from satisfaction to confusion, to something that might have been fear. He handed me the microphone, probably assuming I was going to laugh off his joke and restore the evening's harmony. I looked out at the sea of faces. Relatives, family friends, strangers who'd just witnessed my public humiliation. For once in my life, I had everyone's attention, and I decided to use it. The microphone felt heavier than it should have, weighted with 33 years of silence. I looked out at the crowd. 200 faces turned toward me with varying degrees of curiosity, discomfort, and anticipation. My father had returned to his seat, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he realized this wasn't going according to script. "First," I began, my voice steadier than my hands, "I want to congratulate Theo and Lydia. What we witnessed today was beautiful. 2 people who clearly love each other, promising to build a life together.
That's what marriage should be about." Theo nodded slightly, relief flickering across his features. Lydia smiled, though her eyes remained watchful. "I've known Theo my entire life," I continued, feeling the words gather momentum. "We grew up together, played together, dreamed together, and I've watched him become an incredible man who deserves every bit of happiness he's found." This was safe territory, familiar ground, but I could feel the deeper truth pushing upward, demanding to be heard. But I need to address what just happened here, because staying silent has become a habit I can't afford anymore. The tent fell completely quiet. Even the ocean seemed to pause its endless conversation with the shore. For 33 years, I've been told, sometimes directly, sometimes through carefully chosen silences, that I'm not enough. Not successful enough, not ambitious enough, not worthy enough of the same love and respect given freely to others in this family. My father's face had gone ashen. My mother was staring at her hands.
I became a teacher because I believe in the power of words, of stories, of helping young people find their voices. But somewhere along the way, I lost my own voice. I learned to apologize for my existence, to make myself smaller so others could feel bigger. I found Clara in the crowd. She must have driven up for the evening, her face fierce with pride and encouragement. The man who just spoke called me ordinary, suggested that my life's work was settling for scraps. And maybe, by his definition of success, it is. I don't have a yacht, or a corner office, or my name in the business section. But I have 16-year-olds who write me letters years after graduation telling me I helped them believe in themselves. I have colleagues who trust me with their hopes and fears. I have a life that matters, even if it doesn't glitter. My voice cracked slightly, but I pressed on. I'm tired of being the cautionary tale, the example of what happens when you aim too low. I'm tired of family gatherings where my achievements are footnotes to someone else's headlines. Most of all, I'm tired of watching cruelty get dressed up as humor and served at dinner tables. I looked directly at my father, who seemed to have shrunk in his chair. I love this family, but I won't be its whipping boy anymore. I won't smile and nod while you diminish everything I've built with my life. And I won't let anyone, especially the young people I teach, think that kindness is weakness, or that success only comes in one flavor. I set the microphone down carefully and walked away from the head table, my heart hammering against my ribs. I found myself on the estate's wraparound porch, gripping the railing and staring out at the darkening ocean. The sound of waves against rocks below provided a steady rhythm that helped slow my racing pulse. Behind me, the reception continued in muted tones, conversations resuming gradually, like life slowly returning to a crime scene. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. I turned to find Theo approaching, his bow tie loosened and his usually perfect hair slightly muscled. His expression was unreadable, caught somewhere between admiration and distress. "Probably both," I admitted. "I'm sorry, Theo. This was supposed to be your perfect day, and I don't." He held up a hand, joining me at the railing. "Don't apologize for telling the truth. I had no idea it was that bad." We stood in silence for a moment, watching the horizon swallow the last traces of sunset. "I knew Dad could be tough on you, but I thought it was just his way of pushing you to be better. I didn't realize—" He trailed off, running his hand through his hair. "I'm an idiot, aren't I?" "You're not an idiot. You're just lucky enough to never have to need to notice." "That's not an excuse." Before I could respond, Lydia appeared beside us, having traded her wedding reception heels for bare feet. Her wedding dress caught the porch light like something from a fairy tale. "I wanted to thank you," she said simply. "Thank me? I just turned your wedding reception into a therapy session." She shook her head.
You did something I've never seen anyone do. You spoke truth to Tower without cruelty. You didn't attack anyone personally. You just claimed your space. Your Uncle Richard looks like he's seen a ghost, Theo said, glancing back toward the tent. Good, Lydia said firmly. Maybe now he'll think twice before using someone's pain as entertainment. My mother appeared in the doorway, her face uncertain. Elias, could I speak with you? Theo and Lydia exchanged glances and diplomatically retreated inside, leaving me alone with the woman who'd spent 33 years choosing silence over advocacy. I should have said something, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. All those years, I should have stood up for you. Yes, I said simply. You should have.
She flinched as if I'd slapped her, but I was done protecting other people's feelings at the expense of my own truth. I was afraid, she admitted. Your father has such strong opinions about everything, and I learned early in our marriage that it was easier to go along than to fight. Easier for you, maybe, not easier for me. Tears traced down her cheeks, carrying 30 years of expensive mascara with them. I'm sorry, Elias. I'm so sorry. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, to slip back into my old role as the family shock absorber. Instead, I said, I know you are, Mom, but sorry doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't change what needs to happen now. What do you mean? I mean, I can't keep pretending this family works the way it is. Something has to change, or I can't be part of it anymore. I left the reception early, driving home through darkness while my mind replayed every word of the evening. The wedding gift I'd brought, a first-edition copy of Love in the Time of Cholera that had cost me 2 weeks of grocery money, remained in the back seat, forgotten. My apartment felt different when I walked through the door, as if the air itself had changed while I was gone. I dropped my keys on the kitchen table next to that stack of ungraded essays, still waiting for my attention. Somehow, they seemed more important now than they had 48 hours ago. I was sitting on my couch, still in my wedding suit, when Clara knocked. She didn't wait for me to answer, using the spare key I'd given her months ago. I brought Thai food and wine, she announced, setting bags on my coffee table. Also tissues, chocolate, and a baseball bat, in case you want to break something. How did you even know to come tonight? Theo called me. He got my number from someone and wanted to make sure you had backup. He seemed pretty shaken up. I think I just blew up my family. Good, Clara said firmly. Some things need to blow up before they can be rebuilt properly. We ate pad thai in comfortable silence while I told her everything, the toast, the speech, the conversations afterward. Clara listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making sympathetic noises. The hardest part, I said finally, is that I actually feel guilty, like I did something wrong by defending myself. That's the conditioning talking, Clara replied. 33 years of being told your feelings don't matter doesn't disappear overnight. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Lydia. I wanted you to know that several guests asked for your contact information after you left. Apparently, your words resonated with more people than you might think. Another text followed. Also, I submitted your name to my foundation's board. We're looking for someone to help develop our educational outreach program. Interested? I showed Clara the messages, and she grinned. See, good things happen when you stop hiding your light under a bushel. 2 weeks later, Theo called and asked to meet for coffee. We chose a neutral location, a small cafe in Hartford that neither of us had history with. He looked different somehow, less polished than usual, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of his typical business attire. I've been thinking about what you said, about the family dynamics, about how I never noticed. Lydia's been helping me see things differently. Lydia seems like a good influence. She is. She's got this way of cutting through bullshit that I'm still getting used to." He stirred his coffee nervously. "I talked to Uncle Richard." I tensed. "How did that go?" "About as well as you'd expect. He thinks you were out of line, that you embarrassed the family, that you should apologize." Theo met my eyes. I told him I disagreed.
The simple statement carried more weight than he probably realized. For Theo to contradict my father, his beloved uncle, represented a seismic shift in our family's established order. I also told him that if he wanted a relationship with me and Lydia going forward, he needed to find a way to make things right with you. And he hung up on me. Theo's laugh held no humor. But I meant what I said. Lydia and I talked about it and redecided we want to build our family differently. We want holidays that don't leave people feeling diminished. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I hadn't realized was there. That means a lot, Theo. More than you know. I should have said something years ago. Should have called him out when he made those comments about your teaching, or when he'd forget to mention your achievements. I was a coward. You weren't a coward. You were just lucky enough not to need courage for that particular battle. We talked for another hour, filling in gaps, sharing perspectives, slowly rebuilding a relationship that had been warped by other people's expectations. When we parted, Theo hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Theo, for what you did at the wedding and for the man you've become despite everything." Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in years. 3 months later, my essay, Breaking the Silence, A Wedding Toast Gone Right, was published in Connecticut Magazine. I'd written it on a whim, pouring all my thoughts about toxic family dynamics and the courage required to speak truth onto the page. I'd never expected them to accept it. The response was overwhelming. Letters arrived from readers, sharing their own stories of family scapegoating, workplace bullying, and the slow poison of constant diminishment. A woman in Stamford wrote that my essay had given her the courage to confront her emotionally abusive mother. A young teacher in New Haven said my words helped him stand up to a principal who'd been undermining him for years. My inbox filled with messages from strangers who'd found their own voices through my willingness to use mine. The most surprising response came from my father, a brief email that simply said, "I read your article. We should talk." I deleted it without responding. Some conversations could wait. I was sitting on my apartment's small balcony, grading papers as the sun set behind the Hartford skyline, when Clara called. "So," she said without preamble, "Lydia's foundation wants to hire you full-time. Better pay than teaching, excellent benefits, and you'd be developing literacy programs for underserved communities. Interested?" Maybe. And I meant it. For the first time in my adult life, I felt free to consider possibilities without first calculating whether they'd earn my father's approval. "Also, there's a literary reading next week at that bookstore downtown. I submitted 3 of your poems. You're reading whether you like it or not." Clara: "Nope, no arguments. You found your voice, Elias. Now it's time to let other people hear it." I looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. Somewhere out there, Theo and Lydia were probably making dinner in their new apartment, building a life based on mutual respect rather than inherited patterns. Somewhere else, my parents were eating dinner in their perfect house, maybe finally questioning whether their definitions of success had cost them more than they'd realized. And here I was, finally comfortable with the space I occupied in the world. Not bigger or smaller than I deserved, but exactly the right size for the story I wanted to tell. My phone buzzed with a text from Theo. "Dinner Sunday? Lydia's making her famous lasagna, and we want to hear about your new job prospect." I typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." For the first time in my life, that felt completely true. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.